Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Mm.
Today, we're going to be tackling a really kind of controversial topic. It's the fight for accountability in the gun industry, and specifically focusing on the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, PLCAA, as it's known.
Yeah.
This law basically shields gun manufacturers and sellers
Mm.
from most liability lawsuits,
Yeah.
even in cases of negligence.
Right.
And it's interesting because you think about it. Most industries face consequences for negligence,
Yeah.
but the gun industry has this unique protection. So to kind of understand what this means in the real world, we're going to be looking at the story of Lonnie and Sandy Phillips, who lost their daughter Jessie in the Aurora theater shooting,
Right.
and their journey through the legal system. After this tragedy really highlights the power of PLCAA
Yeah.
and raises some really tough questions.
You know, what's really striking about the Phillips story is that it goes beyond sort of like the legal and political arguments around
Yeah.
gun control. And it really brings us face to face with, the devastating and lasting impact of gun violence
Mhm.
on individuals and families.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Aurora theater shooting itself was just a horrific event. 12 people were killed, 70 were wounded, and countless others were left with, you know, physical and emotional scars. The
Mhm.
Phillipses vividly described the chaos and the terror of that night, the loss of their daughter, and the long road to recovery for the survivors, many of whom faced, you know, life-altering injuries.
Yeah, and their story becomes even more compelling, I think.
Right.
When they decide to take legal action, they chose to sue Lucky Gunner, which
Right.
was the online ammunition seller. That supplied the shooter with over 4,000 rounds of ammunition, including armor-piercing bullets.
And they weren't suing for financial compensation.
Right,
They
yeah.
they wanted to hold Lucky Gunner accountable
Yeah,
for what they saw as negligence.
exactly. They argued that Lucky Gunner had failed to take reasonable steps to verify the shooter's age and mental state,
Hmm.
which were steps that they felt, might have prevented the tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And they were essentially challenging the very foundation of,
Mhm.
of lawful commerce that PLCAA is supposed to protect. If a seller acts negligently, shouldn't they face consequences?
So what happened? Did the court agree with them?
Unfortunately, no. Their lawsuit was dismissed because of PLCAA. But here's the real kicker. Not only did they lose the case, but they were ordered to pay over $200,000 in legal fees to Lucky Gunner, the defendant.
They were penalized for trying to hold a company accountable for potentially negligent practices. That seems unbelievable.
That's the power of PLCAA. It creates a situation where victims are essentially punished for seeking justice.
Wow.
And this gets to the heart of one of the key insights of this deep dive.
Yeah.
Is that the Phillipses' bankruptcy wasn't just a financial ruin. It was the legal system
Yeah.
designed to protect, punishing the victims. And this is a key insight into how this creates perverse incentives.
Yeah, it's almost like the system is rigged against victims like the Phillipses. It's like a David versus Goliath situation where the gun lobby's influence has created this system that shields the industry from accountability.
Yeah.
So what impact did this have on the Phillipses?
They were forced into bankruptcy. They lost their retirement savings, their home, everything they'd worked for. It was a devastating blow, adding financial ruin to the immense grief that they were carrying.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom the emotional toll on top of the financial ruin. It makes you wonder if anybody stopped to think about the human cost
Yeah.
of these laws. But the story doesn't end there, right? Years later, Lucky Gunner faced another lawsuit, this time for selling ammunition to a minor, involved in the Santa Fe high school shooting. What happened in that case?
That's where the irony sets in. In the Santa Fe case, Lucky Gunner settled and was forced to implement age verification measures, the very thing that the Phillipses had sued them for years earlier.
So had their original lawsuit been allowed to proceed, perhaps the Santa Fe shooting could have been prevented.
It's a question that haunts the Phillipses. Their case could have set a precedent, forcing Lucky Gunner and other sellers to adopt safer practices.
Right.
And it brings us to another really critical point about PLCAA, is that by shielding the gun industry from lawsuits, it removes a powerful incentive for them to prioritize safety and responsible sales practices.
It's like the law is saying, you can operate with minimal oversight, even if your actions have potentially deadly consequences.
And this directly contradicts the idea of lawful commerce, when a seller can demonstrably act negligently without consequence.
It's a disturbing thought.
Yeah.
The Phillipses didn't give up, though. They channeled their grief and anger into advocacy, right?
That's right. They became very vocal advocates for gun safety reform, working tirelessly to raise awareness and push for legislative changes. And their efforts actually led to the passage of Jesse's Law in Colorado.
Okay, so let's dive into Jesse's Law a little bit. What does it do, and why is it so significant?
So Jesse's Law is a direct response to the legal barrier that the Phillipses faced because of PLCAA. And it effectively replaces the firearm industry immunity law in Colorado, giving victims of gun violence a legal path to seek justice in court.
So it's like a state-level countermeasure
Yeah,
to the federal protection offered by PLCAA.
exactly. It levels a playing field in Colorado, allowing victims to hold negligent gun manufacturers and sellers accountable for their actions. And it's a testament to the Phillipses' determination to turn their personal tragedy into a force for positive change.
Yeah, it seems like a really great example of how grassroots activism can lead to tangible change.
Yeah.
But it also raises the question, if this kind of law is possible at the state level, why is there so much resistance to similar action on a federal level? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a complex issue
Mhm.
with very deep political roots. The gun lobby is incredibly powerful and has successfully fought against any attempts to weaken PLCAA. At the federal level, however, the Phillipses and other advocates are working to change that. They're pushing for a federal repeal of PLCAA, believing that true change requires action at the national level.
Speaking of powerful entities and legal immunity, there's an interesting parallel with social media companies. Senator Lindsey Graham has been pushing to revoke their immunity, arguing that victims of online harm should be able to sue for damages. Is there a connection here?
There is, and it highlights a point of significant controversy. Senator Graham, who is now advocating for holding social media companies accountable, actually voted in favor of PLCAA back in 2004, and he even blocked an amendment that would allow lawsuits against negligent gun sellers.
That seems like a contradiction. He supports holding one industry accountable, but defends the immunity of another. What's the logic behind that?
The Phillipses have directly accused Senator Graham of hypocrisy, pointing to his voting record as evidence. They argue that he's playing politics with people's lives, prioritizing the interests of the gun lobby over the safety and well-being of American citizens.
Wow, their accusation adds another layer to this ethical debate surrounding PLCAA. It forces us to ask, why are certain industries granted this level of protection while others are not? Are some lives considered more worthy of protection than others?
Those are tough questions, and they're really at the heart of this ongoing debate surrounding gun violence in America. The Phillipses highlight the fact that lawsuits against car manufacturers, for example, have forced them to make their products safer, saving countless lives. And they believe that the same logic should apply to the gun industry.
But PLCAA stands in the way of that. It creates this unique situation where the gun industry enjoys a level of legal protection not afforded to most other industries.
That's right. And the debate over PLCA's constitutionality is also heating up. In 2020, a Pennsylvania appeals court ruled that PLCAA is unconstitutional, stating that it violates the 10th Amendment.
Can you break that down a bit? What does the 10th Amendment have to do with PLCAA? I think some of our listeners might not be familiar with the finer points of constitutional law.
Of course. So the 10th Amendment basically says that any powers not specifically given to the federal government are reserved for the states. So this ruling suggests that PLCAA, a federal law, oversteps its bounds by interfering with states' rights to regulate commerce and provide legal remedies for their citizens.
So this ruling could potentially open the door for more legal challenges to PLCAA, maybe even weaken its grip on the gun industry.
Absolutely. This ruling is a significant development. It suggests that PLCAA is not as ironclad as the gun lobby would like us to believe, and it gives hope to those advocating for greater accountability. In the gun industry,
Before we move on, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier. The Phillips has been very vocal about the gun industry's marketing tactics, specifically how they target vulnerable young men. This is actually a key point in the successful lawsuit against Remington, the manufacturer of the rifle used in the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
certainly, the Sandy Hook case was groundbreaking because it wasn't just about the gun itself, it was about how it was marketed. The court found that Remington had targeted young men in their AR-15 advertising, using language and imagery that appealed to a sense of masculinity and power.
That raises some serious ethical questions. Are they knowingly exploiting vulnerabilities to sell more guns? What impact could this kind of marketing have on individuals who might already be struggling with mental health issues or feelings of alienation?
Well, the court's ruling suggests that these marketing tactics played a role in the Sandy Hook tragedy. And the Phillipses believe that similar tactics are used throughout the gun industry. They argue that the industry is not just selling firearms, but also a dangerous and distorted image of masculinity and power.
It's a powerful argument,
Yeah.
and it connects directly to this larger issue of gun violence in America. The Phillipses are basically saying that the gun industry isn't just selling products, they're selling a culture, a mindset that glorifies violence and weaponization.
And that mindset has real-world consequences. It contributes to a society where gun violence is normalized, where
Yeah.
mass shootings become tragically commonplace. The Phillipses are challenging us to look beyond the legal arguments and confront the deeper cultural forces at play.
This deep dive has taken us from the personal tragedy of the Phillips family to the complex legal and ethical debates surrounding gun control in America. It's clear that this issue is deeply ingrained in our society, and there are no easy answers. But the Phillipses' story is a powerful reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, hope and resilience can endure.
It's a testament to the power of the human spirit. They've channeled their grief into action, becoming a voice for the voiceless, and pushing for change in a system that often feels rigged against ordinary people.
Yeah, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the complexity of this issue, but the Phillipses show us that we can't let those feelings paralyze us. What they've accomplished in the face of such profound loss is truly remarkable.
Yeah, it really is. It's a testament to the power of the human spirit. They've channeled their grief into action, becoming a voice for the voiceless, and pushing for change in a system that often feels rigged against ordinary people.
So where do we go from here? What can we do to make a difference?
That's the question we should all be asking ourselves. I think it starts with education. Take the time to understand the issue, the arguments from both sides, and the potential solutions. Knowledge is really the foundation of meaningful action.
So the first step is to inform ourselves.
Exactly. Once you're informed, you can start engaging in conversations with your friends, your family, your community. Share what you've learned. And don't be afraid to challenge perspectives that contribute to the problem.
It's about breaking the silence
Yeah,
and creating a space for open and honest dialogue.
precisely. And remember, your voice matters. Contact your elected officials. Let them know where you stand on gun safety reform. Support organizations that are working to make a difference. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to the larger movement for change.
So it's not just about understanding the issue,
Yeah.
but actively participating in shaping the solutions.
Exactly. The fight for a safer America requires a collective effort. We need to hold our lawmakers accountable, demand sensible gun safety measures, and challenge the cultural narratives that perpetuate violence.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly insightful and honestly a little heartbreaking. The Phillipses' story is a stark illustration of the human cost of gun violence and the long road to justice.
It really is. And their story also underscores the urgent need for change. We can't allow these tragedies to become so commonplace that we become desensitized to the pain and suffering they cause.
Yeah, it's like we've become numb to the statistics,
Yeah.
headlines, the sheer scale of the problem.
It's understandable to feel overwhelmed, but we can't let that feeling lead to inaction. We have to remember that behind every statistic is a human life, a family shattered, a community forever changed.
The Phillipses haven't given up, and neither should we. Their fight is our fight, and their resilience should inspire us to keep pushing for a better, safer future.
Absolutely. Their story reminds us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles, hope and the determination to create change can prevail. They've shown us that ordinary people can make an extraordinary impact.
This deep dive has left me with a lot to think about, and I hope it's done the same for our listeners. The fight for gun safety reform is far from over. But stories like the Phillipses give me hope that change is possible.
As it should. And it begins with each of us.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. If this episode has resonated with you, I encourage you to learn more about Jesse's Law and the ongoing fight for gun safety reform. Support organizations that are working to make a difference. And remember, your voice matters.
Together we can create a world where tragedies like the Aurora Theater shooting are no longer a part of our reality.